is what we're not adapted to. We're adapted to nature. We can live in forests and be hunter-gatherers
That's
again,
right.
much lower.
There are many people who
thin it
agree
out, but
that that's what we can
I
do.
could do that. We're adapted to nature. We're not adapted to our own creation.
And like you were saying earlier, we may have to go through chaos to get to the just transition.
Where evolution has adapted us to nature,
You're
but we
saying-
haven't had time to adapt to technology.
There's a
So we've got to
writer
use our brains to do that.
whose last name is Lent, L-E-N-T, I want to say it's Jeremy Lent, who goes back to exactly what you said, hunter-gatherers, which in fact may be what we'll do.
We could
As
go
our
back
word
to
says, chaos
half a
to the
billion
just
people at
transition.
most,
Yeah.
and be hunter-gatherers, and they were probably pretty happy.
That's
Before
what
they
most
discovered
people
that
are saying.
before
That's
they-
what most of our type of people are saying in here.
I think they were
You
pretty
know,
happy.
it looks like we try to make our life so easy through our big brain technology, and then ease is not what we need. There's another book that I recently read, Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, how communities take care of themselves. And most of her examples, rather all over the world, but her biggest example was Katrina in New Orleans. And you know, all we saw was Bush saying, "Good job, Brownie," when FEMA and stuff did their thing. But what actually happened, if they didn't have a car, they were out of luck. They were out of the bridges, and they had to wait there. But people came from all over. And that's what this book, Paradise Built in Hell, talks about, is that we are a resilient species, even if we are maladapted, like you're saying, to our technology.
The hunter-gatherers, those communities were 200 at the most.
And what that's really saying is that as human beings, we are very capable of adapting, but we're trapped in a culture that's not.
I think.
And I think it's not just the technology, it's the whole culture that really evolved in a way that forces us into a certain set of, trying to resolve this in a certain set of ways that doesn't actually work. And that's the part that's not adaptive.
And it's a technological culture.
That's what
It involves technology.
And domination culture. And other parts of it besides just the technology.
I wonder if the hunter-gatherers had a domination culture.
No, it didn't. They're pretty non-hierarchic.
Okay, guys, moving right along, seeing that it's already 2:30, we're gonna easily go till, if you all are willing, to 3:30 if you're
I
willing.
have to leave shortly after.
Go ahead, y'all come, you don't need for sure. Okay, now we're in this part of the book, we're in the second section, and it's called Gathering the Needed Tools, and Dick will be on page 131. Chapter 7 is about systems literacy, a toolkit for purposeful change. Systems thinking is a way to see patterns in the messiness of life. Core concept is feedback, reinforcing or positive feedback, and regulatory or negative feedback. All purposeful behavior requires negative feedback. We all participate in systems that we rely on for food, water, energy, housing, transportation, education, healthcare, etc. Thus, systems literacy can help toward positive change. And I show a quote, I'm not going to use that, that's just too much. But here are some practices for purposeful change on page 140. Let's do a look at that. And I'll try to make this quick. Practices. Cybernetics, by the way, is the name of the systems thinking that is used apparently in sociology and scientific thought. Practice for change help in developing your capacity for action. Hannah Arendt, the political theorist, said to act with purpose is to take initiative or to set something in motion. She distinguished such action from labor, forced upon us by necessity, and from work, prompted by utility. This useful distinction invites the question, are there ways to align one's labor and work so as to support one's purposeful action? Practices for changing help in becoming mindful of habitual entanglements. And this gets kind of subtle. And this is where we could bog down, but so, listen as carefully as you can. Habitual entanglements. Pay attention to your own thinking. Develop gut check sensibilities. Suspend assumptions and question routines. Here's another practice. Practices for changing or practices of wayfinders, making connections, developing potentialities, remaining adaptive, and finding one's flow. Practices for change are appreciative. Look for signs of success. The systems approach begins when you first see the world through the eyes of another. When existing systems have been destabilized, one might well feel a heightened sense of vulnerability. In such times, community support is essential. When existing systems have been destabilized, it's also when opportunities for systemic change arise. Another world is possible. So, now, the next two chapters, using systems thinking, and you may still not have a complete idea of what it's about. The next two chapters will finish part 2 of the book, and they are purely about sustainability and resilience.
You know, Donna, before we do that, I would just like to emphasize how important it is what you just read.
Good.
I think that that's what I spent my first spiritual work on, was basically seeing my own mechanicality. And when we are only operating from a point of labor, I mean, I can do that. It's easy. You just, kind of work like a mule and you slog through your day and you get stuff done, but you're not using any kind of creative energy at all, or seeing what you're talking about, systems thinking, your connection with other people, your connection with everything else that's going on, and becoming part of that and acting in a creative way rather than just acting like a mule. And it's something that we each have to deal with personally and in our society.
Thanks. Yeah. So these next two chapters talk about sustainability and resilience themselves. And these are what we can apply to all of the stuff that we're working on in this book itself. Reminders: sustainability prioritizes outcomes, resilience prioritizes the process. Sustainability is an enduring into the long-term future. It refers to systems and processes that are able to operate and persist over long periods of time. The key attribute of linked systems of humans and nature is the recognition of 3 interrelated dimensions: ecological, economic, and social. Planet faces interconnected problems, and you can see the list of them up there. All connected, can't fix one in isolation. Sustainable development recognizes rights of all people and into the future generations to flourish, and you've heard this mean many times: people, planet, and profit. Could we have all 3? The driver of destructive directions is the economics growth model, impossible to maintain, physical impossibility. So here are the ones that we were talking about, those other writers. Ecological economics advocates for a different way. E.F. Schumacher, did you all read that back, what was in the 60s, Small is Beautiful? I sure did. Before we moved out to the land, we read that.
That was an eye-opener.
Yeah, and Herman Daly, Beyond Growth, the Economics of Sustainable Development,
Another eye-opener.
1997, exactly. And Steady State Economics, 1991. Valuing the Earth, Economics, Ecology, and Ethics, 1993, and many more. He's been a really prolific writer. And I don't know anything about systems ecologist Robert Constanza, but he was mentioned. They see macroeconomics as a subsystem nested within the biosphere upon which it depends. In other words, full world economics, where they apply the laws of thermodynamics. Growth can't go on forever. There are fundamental thresholds, no assurance that technology can overcome problems of overshoot. Equitable distribution will become important. There's both human and natural capital. They are not interchangeable. We have to think in terms of the rights of nature. What is it, Bolivia, who's actually given nature rights and written it into its constitution? And recently, I think one of the Scandinavian countries gave the rights to a river. Anyway, there are common pool resources. You all remember when we did a study on the commons? So many of these are ones I just happen to have done. So I did a study on the commons for us with David Bollier. So they're talking in terms of lands or things, water bodies, etc., that are held in common. I read today in one of my news feeds that tomorrow is when the beginning of the public lands gets sold out, to whomever, to do extractive. And a lot of us, it just hurts our hearts, But common pool resources are self-organized community groups that work best to keep from overuse, sometimes helped with government jurisdiction. There's let's see, here's my questions. Let's go straight on to these 3 questions. Look at number 8. Carrying capacity, overshoot, ecological footprint. And Dick, there on pages 153 and 154. And let's take a look. What do you all understand by, let me find one of them. What do you all understand by carrying capacity?
Well, I guess I would immediately thought of my particular footprint. I mean, I think it takes 3 Earths to even deal with how I live. And I'm thinking about how Trump lives.
Right.
I mean, pretty much
Yeah.
2 or 3 Earths.
Yeah. So carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that a given environment can support indefinitely without degrading the ecosystem. And it mentions here, US and Canada would need 4.5 planet Earths. So given that the quantities of resources on the planet are more or less fixed, as population rises, the same resources must be divided among more people, so the per capita quantity that can be consumed continues to shrink.
And what you meant by that figure on US and Canada is it would take 4.5 Earths to support the whole population of the present Earth, the whole population, in the manner in which the US and Canada support themselves.
Right, if all humans, good, thank you, if all humans on the planet have the same level of resource consumption as US and Canada, thanks for the correction.
The population of the planet.
I didn't give you a big enough, here. Okay, overshoot, what is?
In other words, we're at 7 billion, we should be at 2 billion if we wanted to live like US and Canada.
So anybody want to try for overshoot?
Is that moving beyond the carrying capacity?
Pretty much so. So here, we are already in overshoot, the condition in which human demands exceed the regenerative capacities of the biosphere by depleting its natural capital and overfilling its waste sinks. So it's those two things together. Here's a Herman Daly quote that I think is good that goes with this. He identified 4 conditions for avoiding it to live sustainably within Earth's carrying capacity. Humans would need to, 1, maintain the health of ecosystems, our life support system. 2, use renewable resources at a rate no faster than they can be regenerated. 3, use non-renewable resources at a rate no faster than they can be replaced by the discovery of renewable substitutes. 4, emit wastes and pollutants at a rate no faster than the rate at which they can be safely assimilated.
That throws out a question. Why is it that nobody calls for radical population reductions? Moral principle, never more than 2 children,
The
and so
full
on.
quarter? Is it
We
because
never talk about anything like that.
Is it because of
And
the full
everything
quarter
seems to rely on
and
overpopulation. It's all overpopulation.
Well, the Chinese had,
Yeah.
the Chinese had a policy of 1 family, 1 child,
Yeah.
and the whole world thought that that was horrible.
I
How can you do that?
The best favor in the world that any country, any civilization ever has done. We would have about 1 billion more people if it hadn't been for the one-child policy.
Absolutely.
With all its bad aspects, 1 billion people, the earth would really be going down fast.
Well, every time,
They've done a huge favor.
every time I mention that subject to someone, and I've done it several times, their reply almost always is, well, we'll end up with old people that can't do the work.
To some extent, yeah, you'll have a problem in aging population, that's essentially, that's so
We
small
were
compared
wisdom
to the
keepers.
population.
The old people were the wisdom keepers in the older societies.
Yeah.
We needed the old people. They were the baby taker carers, where the moms went out and made food and the daddies went out and hunted. So it's just
A lot of
totally
people
upside
think
down.
we still need to
Totally
bring
upside
people
down.
into the United States to make up for the fact that we're an aging population. I think that's baloney.
Yeah,
Well, that was
Yeah.
when actually the technology did not change so rapidly. And that's when we actually had knowledge. Now we can't, a 30-year-old can't keep up with what the 20-year-olds are keeping up with.
I was listening to an NPR that said, if we come to collapse, they were talking about nuclear winter in their case, so if we come to collapse, the young people aren't gonna know how to read a map. They're not gonna know how to make firewood. They're not gonna know how to feed themselves.
There's a cultural problem here that I'm asking about.
Technology.
Why is it that we talk about we talk about global warming, and we talk about war, and we don't talk about overpopulation?
Let me read you this
It's
quote.
the biggest problem of all.
Behind the many problems lie 2 fundamental drivers, consumption and population growth. So, we all are naming
People
something
realize
just
that's
before I
what
get
we still
to
need
it.
to
What page was that?
We know this
That
stuff.
sounds like a good page.
157. Dick, I'm skipping some quotes on
No,
156
it's
and
not, I have plenty
157.
of quotes.
Yep.
That had a big,
Yeah. 156 and 157.
The nations aren't doing it, or at least the United States is not, but plenty of European nations are teaching control of their population. And we have a dozen wonderful
I don't know if they're teaching it.
overpopulation organizations in the country, and this is one of them, Population Connection. We now have wonderful contraceptives, and they last a long time. and
Why
there are
don't they
no-
use more water?
And there are no side effects.
Well, because the evangelicals don't believe in contraception.
Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
if everyone like us, if we supported these organizations against overpopulation, I think we would make some headway. So I'm glad to have this here, and I'd like to pass it around to you all to look at it. This one is called Population Connection. And there's not just Planned Parenthood, but there's International Planned Parenthood, which is very much like this organization. It's not.
We should talk about stop at 2, the way we talk about vegetarianism or efficiency and so forth. Stop at 2 kids per person.
All of these organizations I'm talking about, they don't take the Chinese approach, which I think we need.
More of a culture.
But they try, because the people in the United States are so suspicious of that coercion. But these are simply trying to get information to people about how to use contraceptives and then get them cheap enough that people all over the world can afford.
And empowering women to demand.
Education, of course.
demand their rights.
Most of all, education. May I pass it around? Sure. Thank you.
The, the fee dividend program's kind of under the line, promotes too, because when they have the dividend given back, they plan for a family of 4, with the parents getting a full credit and the children getting half a credit each, and after that, they don't get any extra dividend back. So it encourages a family of 4.
Our tax law should do the same.
Yes.
We give unlimited deductions for unlimited number of kids. That ought to be for 2 kids, and that's it.
And if you have more than 2, then you have to pay.
You have to pay, yeah.
The one thing that,
Otherwise, you're supporting an environmentally bad thing.
Take a look at it, Aubrey.
the one thing that worries me a little about that pamphlet is the emphasis seems to be on helping third world nations control their population. Usually these are people of color, different races than we are, whereas go to any American city and it can be pretty crowded. I think that we should all be pulling that cart, not just putting it on non-white people to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, they're universal throughout the world.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because I have.
It's not racist.
I've heard, though, there are, like, say, poor people in the cities that were against population control because they felt they were the targets.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, that's slander against these women's organizations, in my opinion, and I've been a member of this organization
Well,
for a long time.
but the perception really should be taken seriously.
The perception is there,
And it needs to be addressed.
or at least the excuse, whether it's real perception or not.
I'm gonna skip on, the next chapter would have been on resilience, but when we talked about sustainability, we did plenty on resilience. There was Dick, for you, if you need, there's a section on pages 171 through 174 on resilience, where it's in a great several pages that I will not read, but it's on that adaptive cycle that we were talking about a few minutes ago: growth, conservation, collapse, and reorganization. But it's a great quote because it shows how a forest grows and then collapses and then grows yet again, and you see all 4 stages. It also shows at the same time how a business grows with those same 4, and so it really becomes pertinent to economics as well as to the environment. And so, moving right along, now, this part is, this last section, the third part, is really what I consider to be very interactive, and it's called Community Resilience in Action. And this is where I want to see what you all know about what Fayetteville is doing or the university is doing. So let's go, and sometimes it may not be pertinent, but let's go ahead and see what the different areas are. Like this first section, see this chapter 11, energy democracy? There's a quote on energy democracy that I'm not going to read because it's going to be too repetitive. But we see so much of what we've just said. We keep jumping right into the next section before I even say it. You guys know exactly where to go. We are a consumer society where we have commodified everything. So we see humans as to be exploited just like nature is to be exploited. So they will be throughout this whole third section, they'll be talking about decentralization. Can we do it? Nuclear is not decentralized, but decentralization, community come together, being nuanced and nimble, rather than having great big structural entities for whether it's energy, distributive energy. For example, if everybody had solar on their roof or whatever, then we would be able to help each other out in a blackout situation. Is there some other way that you perceive energy decentralization? I can go to the book to prime your brain pump.
When you say decentralization, you don't mean of people.
No,
The
it's
most
about energy,
efficient
yeah.
Energy.
people in
Yeah.
the country are in New York City because they take up less space. They're more centralized. So centralization of people is a major way to save the environment.
Yeah, we're not talking about people now, we're about
Okay.
energy
Okay.
specifically, thanks for that. But yeah, in other words, you're talking about building up rather than building
Big
out.
cities are
Because
around.
fossil fuels allows us to have Los Angeles suburban sprawl. And that
Yeah,
forced us to
that's the
use
problem.
transportation that use fossil fuels.
This
The whole
city is
system
trying to
has been set up
centralize
that way,
more.
yeah. What are we doing here in Fayetteville, for example, to make that better? Is there anything we're doing in Fayetteville that makes energy better? Do we have a good transit system?
Well, that's what they
Well,
want to improve the transit system with this new movement.
And whatever else, it could be better, especially Fayetteville's better than all the other cities in the area, but
Hanover, Arkansas.
yeah, we really need more public transportation.
But
Yeah.
wasn't there something in the paper recently about funding being short for the Ozark Regional
Yeah,
Transit?
it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was some material like that.
There
the
was,
last couple of weeks.
just as the city is working on this, what are they calling it, the energy efficiency
Mhm.
program that they have, that then we have less money available for regional transit, but although the plan is to improve regional transit, so I don't know how they're going to.
Gladys, what do you know about that sustainability issue at the city council?
Well, I wish I had, as soon as you brought that up, I realized I should have read that document over again. But they put out a good one, it's on the website now, the city website. And I think, that they're looking for a plan, and it's really, it's not just energy, it's also including like recycling food from apartment houses and restaurants, and a lot of different things that are really intended to kind of get a handle on our emissions.
Right.
But I don't really remember the details of the energy system.
It's all centered around global warming. It's quite a nice plan.
Right.
And the idea of centralizing
Right.
people, walkable cities, get away from cars, get away from
Exactly.
sprawl,
That's-
less highways, more sidewalks.
These last few chapters do exactly what we're talking about now. For
It's
example,
on the web.
this one
We ought
on
to look at that.
energy, and we were talking about transit. Then there's one about water, and how if we used more mimicking nature, we would be able to conserve water supplies. Think about all the things that's happening to water these days, and we've mentioned them, in a city, they take out pavement, they put in more systems that allow water to go into the ground rather than not.
Rain garden.
Exactly, and then there's water saving devices. Then we can move on for the systems about water and how our infrastructure is falling apart. No matter which infrastructure you talk about, they all seem to be collapsing and we're not doing it. And what I understand about the new idea of infrastructure is let the states pay for it. The federal government will only do this much and so the states, so it may be a trap or not, but it's a good topic. It's a good
That's
topic.
always the way it's been. Most of the funding for infrastructure comes from the states and the local communities. The government, the federal government has always been a minority party in that. But an important minority party. And they have, they want to spend an extra $80 billion on the fence along the southern border. Just think of the infrastructure that could be done with that.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
We were talking this morning in exactly about this issue, about what we can do as community and as individuals in order to live more sustainably, and it came up about community gardens or just gardening areas that are ordinarily ignored. Or one thing that came up was the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, and how that could be planted with plants that are beneficial to pollinators, rather than just having grass there.
You know what I've heard one time though, is that anything that grows close to a highway or a street, somehow, I don't know if it metabolizes, but it takes in the pollution that cars give out.
But some plants would be good. I asked that exact question, and actually some plants that could be beneficial because they could metabolize that.
And they might be air cleaners too.
Yeah,
Some plants could
exactly.
be air cleaners as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Cattails were mentioned, but cattails are tall, so that would not be so good for that place.
Here was another chapter that's about food systems.
Interject.
Sure.
We've been discussing all the suggestions everyone's been making the last half an hour now. These are all good suggestions.
Right.
We've been discussing them for 30, 40 years. The problem has been political, is to finally get a massive, is this for us? A massive Marshall Plan, Apollo space system
Right.
funding for all of these ideas. Isn't it true that if we had this massive funding for solar and other kinds of sustainable energy, that we could solve this problem?
Yeah.
But we can't